To give our listeners a bit of background, I'm Kristen, the producer of Radio Health Journal. Larry was my college professor and advisor. He's now recently retired, so I'm very lucky to have gotten to learn from the best. He's one of my favorite people, and when we met up for coffee last month, he had a lot to say, all about dying and death and healthcare and transparency in general within society. So here we are today to have that conversation. And if you haven't listened to his segment on Radio Health Journal, go listen now. It'll give you a good background on his condition, multiple systems atrophy. But where we can start today is that you've been living with this for about 9 years and 2 or 3 months, which is an outlier. Most people aren't making it that long. So does it feel hopeful that you're doing something right, or is it a greater sense of the walls are closing in faster?
Boy, that's a great and difficult question. I mean, I I try to think about time differently now, and I try not to fixate on mistakes I've made in the past, and I try not to anticipate the future. It's a cliche, but I try to live in the moment, and I don't know if that's affecting or helping my situation or my condition at all. But I just kind of take everything one day, one moment at a time and try to find joy and happiness in every day. And I don't really worry or try not to worry about what's going to happen down the road. I mean, not only am I still here, I still have some degree of mobility, which a lot of people have lost by this point. I think to some extent it's because I'm a stubborn person, as you know.
I was
Um,
wondering, like, what has gotten you this far? Like, did you make any changes? And it did occur to me, you're very stubborn.
I I just kind of refuse to stop moving. I think about pain differently now. Pain that would have probably left me in bed even maybe a year or two ago. I just kind of fight through it and it gets to the point where you don't really think about it. I I have very bad muscle rigidity and tightness, and so scalding hot baths help. And when my wife will see the temperature in the bathtub, she'll be like, "How do you stand that?" And it's like, well, I don't really even notice it anymore because it gives me relief. And so I think I just don't let impediments. I'm not afraid to fall. And I think a lot of people, after they've had a couple bad spills, they're like, oh my gosh, I better really kind of start curtailing the things I do. And I went through physical therapy that in large part was teaching me how to fall properly without hurting myself. And so I just kind of refuse to give in or compromise,
Was that
or at
ever
least
a fight?
I try to.
Was that ever a fight with your family? Because I'm thinking, like, if my dad had this and he, like, you fell on concrete steps, like, that's a bad fall. And I would be fighting him on, hey, let's not take any of these chances to where you hurt yourself worse than you already are. But on the other hand, like, outside perspective, I love that you learned how to keep your lifestyle, and if this happens, you know how to make the least impact possible.
Yeah, there have been locking of horns. My wife and son, in particular, emphatically told me many times that I needed to retire a year or two before I did. And there were some ugly conversations because, I'm like, well, okay, thank you for your opinion. I'm going to keep working because this is what I love to do. And sorry. And then we went to Scotland during the summer, took the entire family. And Scotland is known for castles, and they put castles on tops of hills. And my family was like, let's like hire someone or let's get a cart to take you up the hill, or why don't you use a wheelchair and let us push you up the hill? And I'm like, I'm gonna get to the top of that damn hill. So, if you guys want to go ahead, that's fine, but I'm gonna get to the top of the hill and you can wait for me, but no one is driving me up that hill. And I think that they got tired and are oftentimes tired of my stubbornness, but fought my daughter for a long time. My daughter has wanted us to move out by her so she could help with my care. And I'm like, I don't need anyone at this point to take care of me, or at least I'm trying to kind of stave that off as long as I can. But yeah, there have been some real battles.
It sounds like it's been a good thing, this stubbornness, but has it been backfiring on you at all?
I mean, I don't know. I guess I just really haven't even thought about that. It's just I'm just gonna do what brings me joy and contentment as long as I can do it. And it's not really something that in my mind is negotiable. A documentary on MSA came out this fall, and I'm a professor. I taught journalism for years, and I teach investigative journalism, and so I'm really good at researching things. And I was very good at researching MSA to the point where I actually sometimes help my doctors to understand or think about things in different ways. But the you research and multiple systems atrophy is a very good name. Multiple systems. It attacks different systems and it attacks different people in different ways. And so there's a lot of ways you can die. I think right now there's like, from MSA or MSA related, there's like 6 or 7 different ways in which I could possibly die right now. But if you make it to the end, it's very ALS like. And you need 24-hour care and you can't turn yourself over and you can't communicate through speech, and it's it's an awful ending like that. And so I did research and I knew that, but this documentary came out and I watched the first 20 minutes of it, and then I just had to stop because it's like, okay, my brain is now looking at what that end can look like, and I don't want any part of that. So maybe there's some avoidance in that regard in terms about thinking about that. But the idea of, for example, being able to see nothing but the ceiling above you for months as you wait for your lungs to stop working enough to kill you just seems like an awful way to live. And beyond that, it took like 4 or 5 people 3 hours every morning to get this man out of bed, cleaned up, fed, and dressed. 4 people, 3 hours. And and the toll that would take on the caregivers, on the family, it's like I would want no part of that. And so I couldn't watch past the first 20 minutes. So I don't know, maybe there's avoidance and my stubbornness is just not recognizing. Yeah, I don't know.
Have you, I mentioned this a little bit during our coffee date, but if you're going to potentially be in this state of staring and not being able to move your body for months, it's a long time. 24 hours like that is a long time. And and it's really nice that you are able to kind of compartmentalize it right now and think about the present and just be what makes you happy every day. But does any part of you think I should be planning for that? Like, what will make my days happier when I can't move and when I can only stare? What TV shows do I want to watch? What stories and music do I want to hear? Like, don't you want to plan for that so that you're still alive then?
No, I mean, there's a lot of good television to binge. And we oftentimes complain that, oh, if I just had time to do that. I don't know. I mean, we're planning from a practical standpoint, we're planning from a financial standpoint, we're planning from a care standpoint, but planning in terms of, hey, here's what I want to do when I can't do anything. I guess you're asking the question is maybe the first time I've thought about it like that. So I don't know. I mean, do I love listening to books, audiobooks? Do I love listening to podcasts? Yes. Would I love it if that was the primary activity of my existence? I don't know.
Mhm.
I mean, it's a paradox in a couple ways because I'm kind of a loud, obnoxious, gregarious person, but at my core, I'm introverted. I like being alone, but it's not an all or nothing. I think like most people need the ability to have interactions, to have conversations. And and also, I mean, this as well. I have something to say about almost everything. And I think that being in a situation to not be able to say things probably scares me worse than death.
That's what I'm saying though, like, we
Mhm.
have nonverbal specialists. We have, as a researcher, you could be preparing for, okay, I'm not going to be able to talk or do sign language, but what are my options? So that you, again, like months, that's such a long time. And everyone around you who loves you, who wants you to keep living, would love to be able to communicate with you. And you, again, would love to be able to communicate with them back. So I just don't like that when we talk about this, you say it as like, "Well, that's just my life." Because it doesn't have to just be your life. We can plan now to make it your best quality of life for that part of your life.
Mhm. And and I think that my son and certainly my older brother very much agree with you. Um, and I respect their feelings. I mean, they want me to do everything I can to live as long as I can. Um, and I've I've always been a quality over quantity person.
Mm,
And I mean, the, the idea of of needing so much attention and needing so much assistance to eat, to breathe, to roll over so you don't get bed sores, to clean up. Just the idea of putting that kind of burden on people is is just something I have a hard time rationalizing or thinking that, okay, for me to hang on a bit longer is worth putting people through that. And I understand that, because my therapist tells me it's like, oh, that is giving people that level of care, ability to care for you is such a gift you're giving them.
I
Yeah, I
don't know
don't
if
know.
I'd call it a gift.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know.
But,
Um,
yeah, these people love you. They want you to still be with them. So, like, I totally get from your perspective. I would feel this. I would feel so guilty just thinking about it, but that's just because I'm thinking about myself. But if you put yourself in their shoes, in my shoes, we just want you to live as long as you can. So yeah, I'm on your brother's and your son's side.
mhm. Yeah, like I don't even know the months anymore. In early July, I had a heart attack. Obviously a minor heart attack, probably related to my heart compensating or trying to compensate for oxygen not getting to the places it needed to get, most particularly my brain. And, you know, I came out of that like, all right, I would much rather go like that at this point than 6 months of being in bed, staring at a ceiling, requiring multiple people to spend their days caring for me.
Okay, so a couple years ago, we had a coffee date, and you mentioned that you were wanting to do assisted suicide. And then you mentioned you hadn't told your wife, Tracy, yet. I want to know, like, did you go home and tell, what was that first conversation like? Telling her, how did she react? Because that's a huge
I mean,
decision.
she knows me well enough that she wasn't surprised that I was going to be looking into that, because I am a person who always wants to have options to look at. And to me, that's an option. And it's probably, strange, but when we had to make the decision to put our dog down, it was like, okay, this is a compassionate choice to allow her to not have to suffer, and so that she can go quickly in a mostly peaceful manner. And kind of watching her, um and this was, I think, April of 23. I was like, man, I think I would rather go like that. And but I think there's no way my son would be able to come to grips with that. I think children tend to see their parents as these, oftentimes, as bigger, better people than they actually are. And his expectation is that I will fight to the last breath. So probably there will be some in between middle ground between that. But it is, I mean, it's fascinating that one can go online and very easily get uh, all of the equipment and chemicals necessary uh, to do that. I'm not sure that's a good thing. I think it's something that should be administered by professionals, and so I would never have gone that route. But I mean, in MSA, everything is about percentages. My doctor never has, I've never had one of my neurologists tell me you have X amount of time to live. It's always like, okay, by this one, it's 90% likelihood that, by the ninth year. So it's always percentages, but it's percentages early on that you're going to fall and hit your head and suffer, serious brain injury. It's choking. Now it's heart attack and stroke, and eventually it's infections and pneumonia, and you know, just because your lungs aren't functioning properly. So there's all these different ways you can die. I suspect a lot of people with diseases like multiple systems atrophy take their own lives. And it's
Oh,
very interesting to me because
found that in your research?
anecdotally from the groups, I'm on several online support groups, and family and caregivers will come in and talk about how that was a choice that their loved ones made. But it's interesting because we talk early on about if early on there's a small percentage that you'll die in the first year. You'll fall, you'll hit your head,
Mhm.
you'll die. um, what the doctors don't talk about in those early years is depression. And I would, I don't know, but I would be willing to bet that more people early with diseases like MSA, as they're starting to navigate some of those things that start to affect their body, I would imagine depression takes more people than falls. But we don't talk about that very much.
When did you have you dealt with depression before this?
Yeah, I've since, you know, pretty early in my adulthood have dealt with bipolar type 2, which, obviously comes with the heavy dose of depression. And so I've dealt with depression through my entire life. I will say this, or my adult life, I will say that through from my 20 through my 50s, I did not deal with it in a very smart way. I dealt with depression mostly by internalizing it and trying to ignore it, which is very unhealthy.
What does
The
it look
worst,
like to deal with it in a healthy way? Because I feel like you would think, well, this is my issue, let me deal with it on my own. That makes sense to me. So what did it look like after 50 when you were finally like dealing with it healthy?
I kind of like built it or bought into that that idea that oh I'm strong and I can help fix myself and I can help myself and I don't need help and if I need help I'm weak. But I I mean I had to get to a very dark place before I got the help that I really needed. And and to me, finally saying, I can't deal with everything that's happening to me on my own. I need professionals to help me, therapists in particular. That was the strongest decision I ever made. Ironically, the worst depression I ever had were the 3 years pretty much leading up to my Parkinson's diagnosis.
What was going on?
I was just really, really in a deep, dark depression that was prolonged. And really went 3 years where, so this was probably from 12 years ago to about 8 or 9 years ago, where I would teach and then I would go into my office, I would close the door and I would lay in the dark and hope no one knocked on my office door because I just wasn't capable of interacting with people. And most days I would just lay on the floor of my office and just cry. And nope, I'm sorry, my second neurologist talked about the potential that depression might be one of the first symptoms of MSA.
But that's not in any of the like clinical paperwork.
There is research into it, but I, I don't know if it's case or not. I think when he's like, oh, MSA is a big, or I'm sorry, depression is a big part of MSA, my thought was, oh, well, yeah, you've got this terrible disease diagnosis, you're going to be depressed. But he's like, no, no, the depression comes first, and it's oftentimes the first symptom.
What was it like? Because you've finally done all this work and you're in therapy and you've chosen to seek outside help and you have these great coping strategies for when you are feeling depressed and then all of a sudden none of that is working anymore. What is that like? What are your other options at that point?
It's kind of like dealing with physical pain. You you just deal with it and try to get to the point where it doesn't cripple you. I would say probably 4 times in my adult life been very high on that little rubric they have for suicide, where it goes from, I think they call the first stage death wish, where if I died now, I'd be perfectly fine with this, to second ideation. I could be wrong on the stages. And then it's like you start planning and then you take steps to do it. And then five, you attempt. I mean, probably at least 4, maybe 5 times in my life, I've been very firmly in that fourth stage where I've been seriously planning. And to answer your question, the thing that's kind of kept me or keeps me going is that there are times in the past where I was very close to taking my own life. I didn't, and then wonderful things happened after that I'm very glad that I was here still to experience, right? And if I had made that decision, I wouldn't have experienced that great moment. And there are two in particular that stand out in my mind. But the, that's kind of how I look going forward, and I haven't really had a bad bout of depression since February, March, and I was in March, I was firmly in that fourth stage. And I look forward, but then things happen since March that like I'm so glad that I got to experience those things. And so it's it, to me that's the mindset I'm trying to keep. Today might not be great. Today might not. I might not feel very good. I might not want to get out of bed or talk to people, but tomorrow something amazing might happen.
Okay, well, we can't just like gloss over the two memorable moments of your life. But before that, I don't want to forget, does your medication for bipolar mess or affect at all you finding medication to help with your MSA?
The the medicine I take for bipolar, I take two meds, has stayed constant. The MSA, it's not like you take a medicine for MSA. You take medicine to try to treat the different symptoms of MSA.
Yeah, but like your tremor medication, it took a while for you to find one that worked. And it because you had to like get on it for a couple weeks and then get off it for a couple weeks after you found out, well, this isn't working. But it at no point like messed with the other.
I think that there was concern early on in me taking, because when you get a Parkinson's treatment, usually pretty quickly you're going to get a levodopa carbidopa
Yeah.
prescribed. And there was some concern that that was messing with my medications. And
Because it makes
so,
it more risky, right?
what's that?
A
I'm
lot of
sorry.
people on levodopa become like gamblers.
I don't know about that causation. I guess it's possible. I know that a lot of people, or a concern with Parkinson's is that you will start taking on risky behaviors.
Yeah.
And so I'm sorry, I kind of took us off track, I think. But yeah, I don't know. To me, the medication is almost always disappointing
Okay.
because I think we've kind of grown up in this marketing culture of take this and you'll be fine.
Hmm.
And with most of the things that suck about MSA, you take this and it does nothing, or you take this and it helps a bit, but then after a while it doesn't. And so I it I mean it's probably silly, but when something pops up, I barely even message my doctors anymore to say, hey, is there anything I can take for this?
Have you tried any natural or herbal or that kind of holistic traditional medicine?
I have read very little into it, but no.
Why?
I don't know because again, probably it's just kind of the way our healthcare experience in America conditions us. I suspect that there's some legitimacy to it, but I also think that there's a lot of hokum to it.
Yeah. Yeah. But if you're trying manufactured medication, I would just think, well, might as well try this medication that's been around for 1,000 years.
I've had some acupuncture done.
Oh, how'd that go?
That-
Oh, it didn't help at all? I would think that would be good for your muscles.
Yeah, I would too. I think that and doctors can tell you this way better than me or explain it better, or I might just be wrong. I think there's a difference when the pain starts in your brain
Hmm.
and goes to the muscles versus when the pain originates in the muscle and then it gets sent to your brain.
Okay.
So there's sometimes my brain will react to something that's not there just because it's a bad signal,
Yeah.
so it's it's like my body is in a bad relationship where my brain isn't communicating with the other parts properly. Software problem more than a hardware problem. So, there, one of the early struggles I had was walking because you lose your natural walking gait. And there's absolutely nothing physiologically wrong with my legs, and there's nothing that should keep my arms from swinging in the proper rhythm when I walk. Um, it's not a hardware problem, it's a software problem.
I want to go back to the two moments that stood out to you of why you thought, I'm happy I'm here.
One, I took my granddaughter to,
Wait, I didn't even know you had a granddaughter. Did I know this?
I have a granddaughter from my daughter's marriage, so step granddaughter.
Okay. Oh, yes, yes, yes. She
Mhm.
did. Congratulations.
And we went when we were in Scotland, we went to see Taylor Swift.
Jealous. Yeah.
It
Awesome.
was, and I'm, I, I don't think before that experience I could name like three Taylor Swift songs.
Nice.
And yet it was absolutely one of the most amazing, remarkable days of my life. And any amount of pain or sadness or suffering I've gone through was worth it that night.
Why?
Just because it was so magical to be in a place with 71,000 people who felt so positive and so empowered. And I've never been any place in my life where there's been that kind of feeling of love. And the fact that it was so many people who have historically been kind of marginalized in our society, young women, people in LGBTQ communities, just being there and it, it, I mean, and then you're with, a 14-year-old who, you know, Taylor Swift just speaks to,
Hmm.
and you see how that energy is getting into. Yeah, it was. People ask me like, was it epic? And I'm like, no, it was seismic because it was like it registered on the Richter scale.
Yeah, that was
And
crazy.
mhm. Yeah, it was unlike anything I've experienced. The other was a student showed me her first tattoo, which she got on her shoulder, and it was my handwriting, a comment I put on a paper of hers her freshman year that she said changed her life.
What was it?
I wrote on her paper, "You are richly deserving."
Oh, that's cute. Do you remember why? What was the
I
paper?
do. She got the first A in the class in the first reporting class. And generally it takes, 6, 7, 8 weeks before someone gets an A on a story. But she got the first A, and I wrote at the top of the paper, "Congratulations, this is the first A of the semester in the class. You are richly deserving." And she told me that through most of her life, she did not feel that she was deserving of happiness. And she kind of took that phrase and made it her mantra that she is deserving of happiness and success. And that would probably, I'd say, you know, the the greatest award I ever received as a teacher. That moment.
That's insane.
Mhm.
Well, I in the
The
future,
second being interviewed by you, of course. as a
Oh,
professional.
thank you, thank you, thank you. I know you taught me everything I know.
Yeah, hardly. You were pretty good when you got to me.
I was thinking, like, I don't know if it took me 6 weeks to get my first day, but I'll let you have this one.
I didn't say it was the fastest ever. It was the fastest in that class.
I
I
really
believe
love, huh?
Hannah Holthouse was in a different section of
Oh,
reporting that semester.
she's better than all of us.
She had the first A
Yeah.
of two sections. You might have had the first A in your section.
No, no, no. She is her and Christine shoot to the top.
Pretty great group.
Emma, if Emma had been not an English major, she would have been there too. Uh, you were the weirdest teacher I ever had.
Thank
Like,
you.
it is a big compliment because I've told so many people about your philosophy through teaching and how it really was. I was just having this conversation with someone about who are the people and the teachers that changed your life. And you are at the top of my list because of you really want the students to be the best they can be. And it's not a criteria of everyone reaches this bar and then you're awesome. It's individually, you're here and we need to get whatever your individual work looks like at an A. And I thought that was the first time I've ever seen that. And so you're grading people individually, which takes a ton of time. And obviously, you're dealing with all of this. You were already diagnosed for a couple years before I came to Webster. That's a lot of work on someone who's not sick. What, uh, like, why did you keep doing that? That's a lot of work.
Well, because I didn't look at it as work. I mean, that that's that's the simple part. Ironically, it was the rigor of grading that eventually really made it impossible for me to keep teaching. I just couldn't keep doing it the way I feel it's necessary to do that. I don't know how much, I don't think we want to get into teaching philosophy, but even the way we do grades is most often contrary or keeps people from actually learning things
Mhm.
because most things are about short-term memorization and grades are like, here's the line, you have to reach this, you have to cross it. And then it's like, okay, what's the next line?
Mhm.
But it should be, okay, it doesn't matter if I get an A or a C. What should matter is what do I learn from that C to make me better next time? So I don't know. I've just always I come to teaching differently than most people because most of my colleagues and teachers in teaching were were great students. And I wasn't a great student. And I think that not being a great student gave me a different way of looking at teaching. I remember when I was at the University of Kansas and I taught a 500 student lecture, and there was a committee of professors who taught 500 or larger student classes. And there's a legendary psychology professor who was almost bragging that he failed 70% of his class. And I just looked at him and I'm like, you must really suck as a teacher. Because he was like proud of this fact that, oh my gosh, my class is so hard that 70% failed. And I'm like, or you're really bad at your job. It's like my job is to make people better. To him, it was like almost an adversarial relationship between him and his students. To me, it's a collaboration.
Were you doing this with 500 students?
Yes.
That's just not even possible. You don't have that much time in a week.
I had 11 teaching assistants,
Oh my gosh.
and anytime they gave an A, a D, or an F, I would independently grade the paper to make sure that they were aligned with and grading on the right criteria, but also so I could, see where people were. I did stupid things like 4 days a week. I had lunches with students, and every student in the 500 student class was required to go to lunch with me at least 3 times. And so in the student union, there was a reserve table like for the semester for 25 students, and I'd go to lunch with 25 students every day.
Wow. For what? What'd you get out of that? What'd they get out of that?
I knew them. I don't think you can teach someone something if you don't know who they are. How do you teach someone if you don't know what they know? How do you teach someone if you don't know what they want to do with what they're learning?
Mhm.
And so to me, you couldn't you can't teach someone unless you know someone.
Did that, because eventually 25 different people every day for a whole semester. Did you know them, or did the faces just blend together? 500 people in your class.
I I'm not going to lie and say I know all of them, but one, I can say that at that time, when they were in my class that semester, if I saw them on campus, I would recognize them. I would know their name. I would know where they were from. I would know their major. I would know anything about them they had taught me or told me at lunch. When you're teaching 500 students, you have to at least work to create an illusion that you know them and you care about them.
Hmm. So they buy into the
So
class.
I would have kids who would miss a class and I would see them on campus 3 hours later and say, "Hey, you weren't in class today. What's going on?" And they'd be like, "Wait, there's 500 people. How did you notice I wasn't in class?" But just being able to do that says to them, "Oh my gosh, this person cares about me being there."
Hmm.
And it makes them want to be there more.
You had a really successful career as a
Mhm.
reporter.
Oh, as a reporter?
I'm not talking about your
I
teaching.
thought you were going to say teaching. Maybe on teaching. Yeah, I was a good reporter. I'll agree with you on that one.
You could have done a lot of different things because eventually, as I know it, you wanted to move on to have more time for your family, right? Why did you go into teaching, and then why did you stay in teaching?
I fell into teaching,
How?
totally lucked into it. The weird things happened in the world that I graduated at a young age and I started in my dream job at the St. Louis Globe Democrat covering Missouri football. I was 20 years old, and after work, we would all go to the Missouri Bar and Grill,
Hmm.
the sports staff of the Globe Democrat, the sports staff of the Post Dispatch, and it was like the greatest thing ever. These people who I'd been reading, for years. I'm in the room at the table with them, and but you look around the room, and most of them are divorced. Most of them, or a number of them, had drinking issues, were did not have good relationships with their children. And I remember looking around the room as a in my early 20s and saying, I really, really love reporting, but I want to have a relationship with my children. Um,
Did you confide?
Reporting is nights and weekends often, certainly back in that era when it's newspaper and and in a child's life, most things happen nights and weekends, and I didn't want to miss those things. So I knew that there was going to be a point in which I was going to retire and want to do something else. But being a male of our species, I did absolutely nothing to prepare for that day. So kind of that day came, and I knew in my heart that, like, okay, I have to leave. And so I went into the managing editor or the managing editor's office, and I gave 2 weeks notice.
How old are you?
30, 30. Yeah, I gave 2 weeks notice. And then I called my wife and told her, hey, I just quit my job. And she's like, you did what? And I'm like, yeah, it was in that moment and I had to do it then or I never was going to do it.
Hmm.
It was just in my mind, if I don't do it now, I'm going to be 50 years old and I'm going to have missed my kids growing up.
Hmm.
So the newspaper was like, wait, you don't have another job? I'm like, no. And they're like, why are you doing this? I'm like, because I need to do this. And they're like, why don't you take like the next 4 weeks and go, just think this through, because so they paid me to go sit at home and I watched the NCAA basketball tournament. Um, but a funny thing happened while I was sitting at home. People started calling me and wanted to hire me. And I wasn't even putting stuff out there.
Hmm.
Um, couple casinos wanted me to come and either do marketing or get into management programs. And it's like, wow, these are going to pay me way more than I ever made in newspaper. This could be great. And then I'm like, wait, but this is the kind of job where I'd be in the exact same situation of
Yeah.
working 60, 70 hours a week and I'd miss my kids growing up. What's the point of that? So, I thought about my career as a reporter and I got into reporting because I wanted to cover Major League Baseball. But by the time I was covering that, my favorite thing to cover was high school sports. And I was
Why?
like, hmm,
Why?
couple reasons. One, professional athletes aren't that fun to tell stories about because they've been interviewed a million times. They speak in cliches. They're not that interesting.
You have a good Michael Jordan story.
Like, it's funny because we're cleaning our house because we're moving to Denver to be closer to my daughter. And I just read that story a couple days ago.
I've tried to find that story online and I haven't. I would
It's a
appreciate
little overwritten. It happens to be in this box right next to me.
it.
There
What
it is.
students?
The Olympian magazine. And yeah, it was an okay story. It wasn't the best thing I ever did,
Mhm.
but it was before Michael Jordan was Michael Jordan. So it's interesting to look back at. But I
So
was
no,
like, okay, I'm gonna go. I think I'm gonna go back to school and become a high school English teacher.
okay.
So it was the sum. I enrolled in a class at University of Nevada in the summer, and I had a class. It was an educational psychology class taught by a woman named Cynthia Baldwin, and it was just like this serendipitous thing where everything she was saying in this class, it was like everything was relating to me and my life.
Mhm.
And I was like, okay, this is meant to be. So then I'm like, okay, I'm gonna be a high school English teacher. And so I enrolled in the teaching program at the University of Nevada, and I had taken one class when I got a call from the dean at the University of Nevada saying, hey, a visiting professor decided not to come. Classes start in 5 days. Would you teach this class? And I'm like, sure. I've taken an education class. And I took that class, and this will answer both of your questions. It took a long time to get there. It was love at first sight. That's why I stayed in teaching for 31 years because it was love. Yeah, there was just something magical about being in the classroom with kids of that age when they're motivated to learn. So,
How did
yeah,
that first semester go?
it's interesting because I've talked to a couple of kids who were in that first class in the last couple of weeks,
Mm.
and one of the girls was telling me, like, remember, like, how far into the semester was it when you took the syllabus and you lit it on fire and put it in the trash can and said, we're starting over? I think it was about 6 weeks in. I was like, wow, that was it. So the first class I ever taught was an hour and 20 minutes long. And I had this like meticulous plan. And after about 15 minutes, I was done with that plan. and I'm looking at the clock, and there's an hour and 5 minutes left in the class, and then another class that week, and then 15 more weeks of classes. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. So that was a terrifying moment, but that was a very good, healthy moment for me because it's an important stage of teaching, and it helped me realize that until you know you don't know something, it's hard to learn something. So that moment of terror motivated me to learn how to do this thing we call teaching. I never ever think or thought about what I do as teaching. I collaborate and I motivate.
That's very rah-rah for you.
What?
Collaborate and motivate.
I mean that's what I did. I collaborated with students so that they could learn, and then I motivated. Well, usually the motivation comes first, but oftentimes the motivation has to come through failure. That's why teaching's so hard now, because students are not taught how to accept failure anymore.
What does that look like in the context of your class?
Students have been conditioned to think that failing at something is losing, when failing at something is a step towards learning and mastery. You can't learn something until you know you need to learn it. You're not motivated to learn something until you know it has value to know it.
Hmm.
So if, I've had students, and you're probably one of them. Well, actually, I know that you got B's in high school,
Like
but
one.
there are students who've never had a B on an assignment in their life, and they come into my class, and the first thing they get is a D,
Mhm.
and it's traumatic. But the grade doesn't matter. What matters is what can you learn from this piece of work so that your next piece of work is better.
Mhm.
And the way we educate tends not to do that. The grade is the end. To me, the grade is just one step in the learning process. It's the what next.
Yeah,
Has
but
nothing to do with the topic we're talking
I know. I know. I just is like I think you have the perfect philosophy if there is as near to a perfect philosophy on teaching. And that's like through my experience. And I just think it like if we're going to talk about anything and everything, it's important to mention because I wish
It
all
doesn't work. It
like
doesn't work for everyone. There, there are students, and there are more of the students like this today than there were when I started, who really struggle with ambiguity.
yeah.
They really need to know, what is it exactly that you want.
But I think that's a good like learn thing to learn. So in the process of learning whatever your course is, that's a good life skill to have.
Continue. How so?
I mean, if like you're not always going to have a rubric for
Mhm.
life. And so if that would be a cause of a lot of anxiety if I go through middle school, high school saying, here's exactly how you write this 5 paragraph essay. And then I get out into of a
Mhm.
education habitat
If
and nothing is now I'm having to look for jobs on my own. There's no rubric on how to look for a job and you're just like I just think that's a really worthwhile skill to have and it's a secondary skill that you're learning through how you teach. So even if it's not how they want to learn, it's still you learn things all the time that are hard. It's a hard thing. It's uncomfortable to have to do, but it's worthwhile and it's just going to make you better prepared for life as a whole, not just in academics.
I fell down the concrete steps, because I was stubborn and I didn't want to use a cane.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to use a cane because when you have a cane, it changes how people perceive you. And when you use a cane or a walker or a wheelchair, it's the first thing that people notice about you, and it is what people will generally use to define you.
Do you do that to other people?
So probably, I mean, I try not to, but I probably do. So I fought using a cane for a long time, and then I fell down those steps.
Mm.
And I learned that, yeah, it makes sense to go down steps with one hand on the railing and a cane in your left hand. So I learned. I fell, I failed, I got up, I learned, and I learned how to use a cane. And there is a proper way to use a cane, and so sometimes you fall with the cane. And so I'd fall with the cane. I'd be like, man, I fell. Like, what am I going to learn from that? Oh, when I fall, I usually fall to my right because it's my right foot that messes up. So I almost always fall to my right. Well, okay, I'm going to make sure that if I'm on a sidewalk, that the grass is always going to be to my right. So when I'm walking down a sidewalk, I always walk with my right foot closest to the grass.
Mhm.
Why? Because I'd rather fall on grass than on concrete. So you fall, you get up, you learn from it, and you do better the next time. So I mean, I may be right, I might be wrong, but I do walk the walk.
When you were
Good pun,
in,
by the way.
huh?
That's a good pun, by the way.
It was fine. You could
So I mean, I do try to practice what I preach.
when you were in those bars in your 20s with the 50-year-olds who were divorced and weren't spending time with their kids, were you talking to them about these fears you had? Or maybe not fears at the time, but or were they ever giving you advice that you thought, oh, that's not the advice I want to take, or yeah, that's good.
It might have been the only time in my life that I just sat and listened.
And what were you hearing?
A lot of great stories.
Mhm.
I mean, these are people who are storytellers as a career.
Yeah,
Um,
writing.
and
Not great
and
audio
what's
storytelling
that?
or whatever. I'm a good writer. I'm not a great speaker.
Well, but I mean, storytelling is storytelling. So they had been there. Well, oh my gosh, I can't slug. What one of the men was in his 80s and had covered Babe Ruth,
Whoa.
and he's telling stories about Babe Ruth, and it's 1984, and I'm sitting in the Missouri Bar and Grill on Tucker, and listening to Slug tell us stories about Babe Ruth. It was amazing. So I sat and listened, which I'm not really great at.
I think you're a good listener.
I tend to talk too much.
Were you ever a spiritual guy? Like growing up, did you have religion?
My upbringing, I was raised Jewish in what I would call a very reformed Jewish. We were, we would do Passover, we would do Yom Kippur, we would do Rosh Hashanah, the high holidays. And then we did Hanukkah because all of the kids I went to school with were getting stuff for Christmas. So we did Hanukkah. But, you know, we didn't go to synagogue hardly ever. And then my dad passed away. And I had an uncle who was my mom's sister's husband, who was a wonderful man, but he was significantly more of a practicing Jew. So I think he kind of tried to step in to some extent and fill that father role. And all of a sudden, I was going to Hebrew school 3, 4 days a week. I was going to synagogue every Saturday all day. I was wearing a kippah, a yarmulke, and getting beat up at school.
Now, did you like want to do it? Had you bought into the faith?
I'm gonna say probably not.
Interesting.
I don't remember.
Okay.
I do remember by my bar mitzvah, so within 5 years of my dad dying, that I I one of my first acts as a adult under the Hebrew Talmud would be that I was my decision that I was not going to be a practicing Jew. But I don't know. There were things about the religion that were irrational to me,
Like what?
like the diminished role that my mother had in my bar mitzvah.
I'm not familiar.
She was my parent, but because she was a woman, she had no role. If my dad had been living, he would have had a significant role
Mhm.
in my bar mitzvah. And, why is my mom, who is the central figure in my life, why is she a bystander or a spectator at what is supposed to be this most important of events of my life? So it's not like I thought about things like feminism much as a 13-year-old, but it's like, wait a minute, there's women are treated very marginally by this religion at this time and for the past 2,000 years. And I don't know that I really agree with that. So there were a lot of things like that um, I will say a lunar calendar makes a lot more sense, especially if you add a 13th month,
Hmm.
which I don't know why they didn't do that originally, but so they
Was
had things
Tracy
right.
religious?
Hmm.
Was Tracy religious? Or is she?
I would say more religious than I was.
And
By the
having
time we met,
kids.
what's
Sorry.
that?
Well, I'm thinking having kids changes some people's minds about religion. Did that affect you at all?
I am not religious, but uh, I I say this or I said this in my ethics classes. The teachings of Jesus are central to my moral framework.
Hmm.
My moral compass is greatly uh, steered by uh, things that he believed and things that he taught, things that he preached. And so I'm not religious, but I am fascinated by religion.
You still not religious?
I'm not religious.
Do you think you're an outlier in that sense of people with fatal conditions?
I I think that I will stop breathing, my heart will stop beating, my brain will turn off, and I suspect that will be it.
Do you have any hope of what's after that?
No, because it's going to be what it's going to be.
Yeah, but you're a thinker.
And I've thought a lot about it. I've probably read more about religion than any other topic in my life
Why?
because it fascinates me.
What have you learned from it all?
I've learned that there are far more similarities across religions than there are differences. I've learned that in most things in life, there are people who view religion on the extremes. And I kind of, I said that Jesus is at the center of my moral compass. So is Aristotle. Aristotle believed that the best solution seldom resides on the extremes. It almost always resides somewhere in the middle where mediation and
Mhm.
temperance is necessary. And so I feel that in the United States today, like so many areas of our uh, society, the extremes are the loudest voices. They're the ones that we hear, and that's why we can't fix any problems. And I think that the extremes in religion kind of impact them the same way. And so in politics, the extremes are mostly about maintaining control.
Yeah.
And I think in religion, the extremes are mostly about maintaining control.
Do you think, do you believe there's something, or you just, there's probably not anything?
I think that there's obviously something because the universe exists.
Hmm.
I think that the something is probably beyond our understanding,
Hmm.
and the something probably doesn't spend a lot of energy of what's going to happen to Larry Baden in 2024, 2025 on that little speck of dust called the planet Earth. I don't believe that there's a deterministic God.
That's interesting. I feel a lot of comfort, or I grew up very Catholic, and that is where I think most of my confidence comes from, because there's a lot of comfort for me knowing that if I fail, I have the ultimate backup guy on my side. And so I would think, and what I've heard from other people in similar situations as you, like they find a lot of comfort in being able to give their worries over to God or over to their bigger being. Where do you put your worries? Your therapist?
I mean, I don't, I mean, what are my worries?
Well, dying is a big worry.
But
Pain is a big worry.
I mean, but I mean, dying shouldn't be a big worry. It's just part of living.
That's a view I think most people have when they believe something's on the other side of dying. But you don't really think there's anything on the other side of dying.
I don't, it's not that I don't think, I just think it's not, I think it's not likely as organized religion posits or presents it as being.
Have you read a lot about religion? Have you read a lot about the near-death experiences of people?
Well, I would say not a lot, but some.
Okay. They seem to be very similar across people in different religions and
Mhm.
across the world. You don't think about it.
I mean, I, I think there's a difference between death and, and near death. And I think you're not going to know until you experience it. It's like when you're boxing, you can train and be ready and have the best skills in the world until you get punched in the head. You don't know what it's like to be punched in the head. So I'm not saying that there is or isn't. I'm saying I just don't know, and I'll find out when it happens.
Okay. I was in a boxing class last year, and it was a new gym I went to, and it was all guys, and we had to spar, and I got punched in the face, and I thought, I don't think this is for me. So you're right.
Yeah, I mean, until something happens, it's just a concept. I don't know, and this is a silly metaphor, but my kids and I loved roller coasters,
Mhm.
and we would go around different amusement parks around the country, and we'd go on the roller coasters, and we'd have favorites, and it was great. And when you ride a great roller coaster, you get off and you'd be like, it'd be great to get right back on and ride again. But also you're getting off and you're looking and there'll be a little kid with his dad, and you're like, oh my God, that kid's gonna have such a great ride. It's my time, it's their turn. And that's kind of how I look at life. I had a great ride. I'm having a great ride.
Mhm.
And it's going to be my turn to get off, and that might be tomorrow, it might be 6 months from now, it might be 6 years from now, probably closer to 6 months than 6 years, but whatever it is, it's going to be. And so I'm going to make sure the ride's going to be as great as it can be, and when it's my turn to get off, I'm going to make room for someone else, and hopefully their ride will be even better. That's the way I look at it.
When we were kicking around the idea of having this conversation, part of it was because you think that death isn't talked about enough. And that kind of surprised me because I feel like we have like crime documentaries and podcasts and like things about dying of being released every day. So what do you feel in the conversation is missing?
Well, when you have a disease like MSA and people find out you have a serious degenerative neurological disease, everyone's first question in their mind is, oh my gosh, are you going to die?
Hmm.
And almost no one will ask it.
It does look like bad form, yeah.
And once people know that, 90% of people within 9 years of symptoms will die with MSA. When people know that, then they become less likely to talk about it. And
How do you
I'm
know?
like, what's that?
How do you want people coming up to you saying, "Oh, when are you gonna die?"
I want people coming up and talk to me and saying, tell me about this disease.
Hmm.
What are you dealing with? What's the, and again, I only speak from my own experience. I don't speak universally, but I can tell you to me that no, having a pretty darn good sense how you're going to die is worse than knowing when you're likely to die.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, it it is impossible for me. My son cannot talk about this. And yet it's something we should talk about.
What
We
aspect?
we learn from each other as we go through life. We learn how to live. Well, we should talk to each other so we know what to expect as we're moving towards not living. But it's, oh my gosh, it's sad, it's depressing. It it's life, and we should be able to talk about it. I joke about it,
Hmm.
um, because sometimes you just have to joke. There are great things that you can do with Parkinson's. I think I've told you this. No one makes fluffier eggs than I do, right? So but but we don't have important conversations about it. You know, watching my mom die during COVID in she was in a very high level of 24-hour a day care facility. Basically, we're just warehousing people with very little concern about quality of life. And I would argue in some ways we're trying to make it so that the end is more comfortable for the people watching their loved one die than it is for their loved one.
Interesting. What would a comfortable end look like? What's the alternative?
Well, I think we would have to have, I don't think that we're going to go back to what we should go back to, but I think when we were much closer as generational family units,
Where they all live.
we were much closer where, you know, pe people died at home with their loved ones around them. They didn't die after 6, 8, 10, 12 months, 2 years in basically a warehouse for dying people.
But they're also extending that life.
Are they?
Yeah. You could argue quality of life, but your heart attack in June or July could have died from that. And now your life is extended.
Yeah, but not because anyone saved me,
It just stopped.
because my heart kept going.
Do you feel suppressed by things you want to talk about around death? let's take your son out of it because he doesn't want to talk about anything. But are there things you want to have discussions about that the people around you are uncomfortable with?
Yeah, that's why I'm talking to you.
Well, well, I want to know what that is. I want to be this outlet. What do you feel like we're not talking about?
I think we're not talking about how to embrace the end.
How so?
I think just the end, uh, for most people, realistically, is a terrifying concept, right? I admire people of great faith, but I imagine even people of great faith that there are many who will wonder at the as they're approaching death, is it going to be the end? I don't know. I think it's like anything else. It's hard for us to learn and grow if we don't discuss.
I think a lot of people are worried about stepping on your feelings, bringing it up.
But I think that's also because of the stigma we've created as a society as it being something we don't talk about.
Do you feel like a lot of people in your situation feel the way you do? Or do you think they don't really want to think about it? They don't want to talk about it. They don't want people asking them when they're going to die.
I imagine most people, I mean, have been have lived in this same culture in which it's kind of a taboo topic, and so I imagine most people it's uncomfortable to talk about.
Hmm.
But I mean, I'm a teacher, and sometimes as a teacher, we have to talk about things that are uncomfortable. So if talking about my experience is going to help someone approach their experience, or maybe think about it, approaching it in different ways, then that's why I want to talk about it.
What, aside from financial and funeral, do you care who comes to your funeral, by the way? How many people are there?
I, I,
Who?
I'm, the plan is not to have a funeral.
Oh, really? Are you being cremated?
Mhm.
I think I'd be cremated too. It's just so
Yeah.
expensive. For what? For nothing.
I mean, yeah, but also it's a space thing. We're taking up a lot of space.
Do you want like an Irish funeral, drinking happy memorial
I
sorts?
mean, I don't like Tracy and I, both of us have said that, there's not really, I think my family will gather and we'll have a toast and probably hopefully, I would hope when people gather at whatever the heck happens when I die, that there's just a lot of laughter.
Mhm. Is your Are your feelings about not having a funeral similar to your feelings about being a burden for your caregivers towards the end of your life when you can't do anything and all these people have to spend hours helping you? Are you feeling like, well, I don't want to have a funeral or a gathering because then all these people feel obligated to come and I don't want them to feel obligated to celebrate my life and I'm not even there?
I, I think it's kind of silly to celebrate people once they're gone. We should celebrate people while they're here.
True. It's kind of for the family though.
I think that there's some sense of closure.
Hmm.
And I mean, I, my therapist, my first therapist, was very much of the opinion that a lot of my psychological issues revolved around the fact that as an 8-year-old, I was not allowed to go to my dad's funeral.
Was that a Jewish thing?
No, it was my mom and older siblings thinking that they were protecting me thing.
Oh man. Do you agree with her? Do you think about that?
I think that I did not have closure on my dad's death, but I think it's more because of the shielding they did for me while he was dying, because I did not know he was even sick until like
Oh,
2 or maybe 3 days before he died. And he had been fighting cancer for, you know, 18 months.
okay. So how'd that work with you? Because you didn't really go public with this for the first 4 or 5 years.
Um, and pretty much, I mean, I told people about the Parkinson's pretty much when I was diagnosed with Parkinson's. When it was switched to MSA, I didn't tell people for over a year because there's not a definitive test. There's tests that give indicators and percentages. And so I just kind of wanted to wait to see if the symptoms were going to, what symptoms were going to come next.
Mhm.
I didn't want to tell people that like I had a incurable fatal disease until I knew for sure, you know, and I've told you this before, my neurologist always was, you don't have Parkinson's, you have a Parkinson's diagnosis. You don't have MSA, you have an MSA diagnosis.
I know your neurologists are annoying. Like,
Well, no, it's true. I mean, it accepts the fact that there are things we don't know. And so, you know, I've gone to multiple neurologists and I've seen different neurologists, and there isn't universal agreement that it's MSA among the ones I've talked to. And so you know, I don't know when it happened, but you know, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what we call it. Whatever it is, it's going to do what it's going to do. And, you know, I mean, every day is a new fun surprise.
what? Okay, where the initial question 10 minutes ago was going, aside from finances and like after death arrangements, what conversations are you having with Tracy that are only happening because you're dying?
Um, we're having, well, I mean, obviously we had a long conversation about where we should live.
Yeah, do you feel in control of that decision?
Do I feel in control? I mean, not as much control as I would want, but, you know, I'm not the only person impacted by the decision. You know, kind of to get to your question, you know, there's books that we're going through and filling out that are about like I can, it's sitting somewhere over there. But yeah, you buy a book and it tells you all the things, you know, so it goes through, so it has like a password to get to accounts so that she can cancel subscriptions. It's got, yeah, anyone gets this book, like they can hack the heck out of me. You know, it's, you know, all insurance information, you know, it's like a end of life book.
But no other, I don't know what, it kind of goes back to you can't learn until you know what you don't know. I don't know the conversations that would come up for me if I was potentially dying in the next 6 months.
I
Have any
mean,
of those come up where you're like, I would not have talked about this, but since this might be the last time I get to talk about this, let's do it.
uh, now that we're moving and, you know, so we're going to be gone in like 2 weeks. And I'm having lunches with some close friends who realistically, I'm like, this is going to be the last time I ever meet in person with this person. I am processing, are there things I need to say now? Tracy and I, we had a while ago conversations about what steps I want to take in to prolong my life. So I don't want to be on a machine to breathe. I don't want to be on I don't need to want to be fed through a feeding tube. So I don't, I just, I want to die naturally. So yeah, so I mean, we've had all those conversations and we were very agreeable, aligned in terms of those decisions. Like I said, my brother and my son have very different opinions about that.
Well, you applied for clinical trials, right?
Hmm.
Clinical trials or like
I have. I just got contacted yesterday by a project or study they're doing in Denver.
no
So I
way.
need to get back to them just to see if the timing will work.
That's huge. What are they studying?
I didn't really look all that closely at it. I just know that it's something I had applied for, and I got an email yesterday saying, "Hey, contact us." I'm sorry, not an email. It was a phone call.
So you're not donating your body to science?
Probably my brain.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, they can harvest the heck out of my body for organs if there's anything that would help anybody. But it's kind of I mean, this is a sad thing. Like people with Parkinsonism diseases and Parkinson's, it's so important for their brains to be studied,
Mhm.
and yet it can be very expensive for a family and insurance companies to do that. So
What?
why aren't there conversations, public policy conversations about how to do something that's going to be helpful for society? Yeah, I mean, because in some cases you have to keep someone on life support, and then it's exceedingly expensive
The family
to,
has to pay that?
in some cases, yes. And oftentimes the families aren't aware of it.
No, I had no idea.
And then they get hit with this bill that, like, hey, it's going to cost you X thousands of dollars to get the brain to Pittsburgh to be studied.
I just assumed the researchers using that, the institution using that is would cover all of those fees.
I mean, maybe in some cases, but I don't think that's the norm.
Wow.
Not
That
that I'm an expert on it, but yeah, I know that there's because in MSA discussion groups online, people are like, be careful if you're donating your loved one's brain because
wow.
there can be big costs associated to it.
I will probably wrap this up because I've kept you for 2 hours.
Really? It's
I
been
know. I
fascinating.
apologize. But
Certainly, I love talking about myself.
I already knew that. As you've been a teacher for so long, and even like as a journalist, I feel like a teacher, So your whole life you've been giving lessons to people. And I don't necessarily believe that dying has to be a lesson. I think it can just be what it is. It's an ending, whether it's tragic or not. Um, but you wanted to talk about this, and I'm wondering if you have found a lesson that you wanted to share, or if this conversation is just going into the greater discourse and someone might eventually stumble across it and find a silver lining to piece together from it.
The, the lesson I've learned, I've always been good about not dwelling on the past, learning from yesterday and then moving forward,
Mhm.
hopefully better for it. But I was a person who lived in the future. I want to do this so that I can do this, and I can't wait for this.
Mhm.
And so I wasn't as good at living uh, in the moment. It's ironic because in a classroom, when the door closed, I was in the moment. But in virtually every other aspect of my life outside the classroom, I wasn't. I was always projecting forward. And what this has taught me to do is to just stay in the moment and look for enjoyment in the moment. And, you know, that it's oftentimes hard, but appreciate the good things and not try not to dwell on the negative things. There's no doubt in my mind if I were a person who was fixating on how bad like my the cramp is in my right foot right now, that I would lose out on a lot of positive, good experiences. But it's like, okay, it's just a cramp, it's there, and I can deal with it. And I'm going to put a sock on and a shoe on, and I'm going to go have lunch with Kim Kleiman.
I
You
think
know,
that's
so
good.
I was at the Muhammad Ali Peace Center in Louisville over the weekend, and I doubt he was the first person to say this, but it's like, don't count the days, make the days count. And that's a pretty good way to kind of explain what I've learned. It's like, what am I going to do? I wake up every day and say, what am I going to do today
Mhm.
to have some joy and some laughter? What am I going to do to make someone else's life? I walked to Schnucks yesterday to get something to cook for dinner and met a gentleman outside who was living on the streets, and we went in and we bought him fried chicken for dinner. And, you know, it's one thing.
What are you doing today?
I'm going to go to lunch with Kim Kleiman, and then I'm going to see what the day presents to me. But hopefully, maybe I'll say something that will change the way Kim thinks about things, or maybe a server. I'm giving away a lot of stuff because we're moving, we're downsizing. And so, it's a silly thing. I have hundreds of sports bobbleheads, and someone was in work stretching our carpets as we're preparing to put our condo on the market. And he's like, oh, I'm just because I have blues memorabilia. He's like, I'm just the biggest blues fan. And I'm like, who's your favorite player? He's like, oh, definitely Vladimir Tarasenko. I'm like, well, here, take this. And just handed him a Tarasenko bobblehead. And he was like, are you serious? I'm like, yes, have a good day. Enjoy this bobblehead.
That's a good feeling too.
It's a great feeling. Yeah. And it's like, you know, he's gonna put it on a shelf, and it's gonna bring him happiness, and that's a lot better than it sitting in a plastic bucket in my daughter's basement in Longmont, Colorado.
Mhm. I don't have an eloquent way to wrap this up, but I can't thank you enough for doing this. I love talking to you, and to now have this recorded is really a gift. I know we've said some things are a gift, this
Mm.
podcast recording. This is a gift. So thank you.